Good morning. Today is Thursday, June 6, 2024. Today is part 2 of a series. Part 1 was this past Tuesday, June 4th. And in part 1, we learned that the source of how a Jewish marriage is created by the groom giving and the bride receiving a ring under the chuppah, the source of that is, according to the Talmud, Avraham's purchase of a field from Ephron in which to bury Sarah. This narrative is in Bereishit, the book of Genesis, the parsha of Sarah. And I insisted that the common denominator of these two contexts is not an acquisition. There is no sense in which Jewish marriage is an acquisition or purchase. And I demonstrated that from a passage in the Book of Ruth, which we will read in the synagogue a week from today on Thursday morning, the second day of Shavuot. Rather, I explain, the common denominator in these two contexts is an action called a kinyan, which causes a change in status. The change in status could be a change in ownership, like a purchase, or the change in status could be a change to establish a commitment to go from being a single person to a married person, like a marriage. The same word kinyan is used. But why is Avraham's purchase of a field in which to bury Sarah the narrative which every single wedding ceremony is supposed to elicit? If you learn this lesson, if you study the Talmud and you know about this, that the source of what's happening under the chuppah is from this passage in the Torah, why does Jewish tradition want every person at a Jewish wedding who knows this to recall, to be reminded of Avraham and Ephron purchasing a field one from the other? Why do we need to remember that at a wedding? In Bereishit, the parsha of Sarah, Sarah dies. Sarah, the wife of Avraham, dies. Avraham needs to bury her. So Avraham comes to a man named Ephron, who has a field, and he says to Ephron, I want to buy the field. Avraham wanted to buy the field. There's some haggling, and the Torah says, Vayishkol Avraham leEphron es hakesef. Avraham weighed out the silver pieces, which was the price they had agreed to, and bought the field from Ephron. And then the Torah says as follows, Vayakam hasodeh v'hama'ara asher bo la'Avraham. Now, what that verse means to say, it's an idiom, it's the use of an idiom, a biblical idiom, and it means to say that the field and the cave that was in the field was established as Avraham's possession. Vayakam means that idiomatically, the way we would translate it means it was established, it was ratified as Avraham's field because he had purchased it from Ephron. But the word that's used, vayakam, means lifted up. It's a strange word to mean ratifying or establishing something when it actually means rising, going higher. And Rashi notes this, and Rashi says the following. Tekuma haisalo, the field transferring from Ephron's possession to Avraham's, the field had an ascension. The field rose in holiness. Sheyatza miyad hedyot, it left the possession of a common person, a regular person, Ephron, liad melech, and it came into the possession of Avraham, was called a king, a prince, an aristocrat. The field rose in holiness. The field had a tekuma, vayokam. It rose up. It became higher, more holy. The change in status from less holy to more holy went along with the change in status of the ownership. First it was Ephron's, and now it's Avraham's. And that is precisely what happens at the moment of marriage. It's not a purchase, it's not an acquisition, but it's a change in status. It is an elevation in holiness. Kedusha, holiness, sanctity. That's why we call the marriage ceremony kiddushin. That's the word, same word from kedusha, kiddushin. And that's why the same word, the same kind of action, kinyan, is used in both contexts. Because kinyan can mean a change in status of ownership, or it can mean a change in status of holiness. That's why the same word, the same action is used. One of the several reasons we read the Book of Ruth on Shavuos is because what happens at the end to Ruth and Boaz, the elevation of their relationship from two single individuals to a married couple through their commitment to each other, is exactly what happened to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. An elevation in holiness at receiving the Torah, an elevation in holiness at the union with God and the Jewish people, just like at the union of Ruth and Boaz. And that is foreshadowed at the very beginning of the story. Naomi, her husband Elimelech, her two sons Machlon and Kilion, they live in Bethlehem. There's a famine, and they leave. They go to Moab. Today that's part of Jordan, on the east bank of the Jordan River. The two sons, Machlon and Kilion, married two women from Moab. Machlon marries Rus. Kilion marries Arpa. And then Elimelech dies, and then Machlon and Kilion die. And Naomi is bereft, left with these two women, her former daughters-in-law. And Naomi decides to return home to Bethlehem. And she says to Rus and Arpa, Lechna shovna, go back home, go back to your family in Moab. We're no longer related. You are young. Go back and live your life in Moab where you came from. Vatishak lohen, and Naomi kissed them goodbye. She kissed Rus and Orcha goodbye. Vatisena kolon vativkena, and all three of them lifted their voices and cried. Vatishak Arpa lechamosa, and Arpa kissed Naomi goodbye and went back to her home in Moab. V'Rus davka, but Ruth hugged Naomi. Ruth clung to Naomi, and Ruth accompanied Naomi back to Israel, to a life of Torah, to a life of greatness for all time among the Jewish people, the prototype of a righteous convert. And she became the first woman who is praised as an Eshes Chayil, a woman of valor. That phrase was first used about Ruth. And she was the great-grandmother of David HaMelech, King David, and the matriarch of Mashiach, who will usher in the Messianic era. Listen, please, to this insight that I heard from Rabbi Chaim Kreisworth, who lived in Antwerp, Belgium. The key point of departure between these two young widows is this phrase that I read, Vatishak Arpa lechamota. Arpa kissed Naomi goodbye. V'Rus davka ba. But Ruth clung to her, hugged Naomi. Both of these young women had good intentions. They both meant well. But Arpa was satisfied with an externalized gesture. She kissed her, and then she left. While Rus engaged in a hug and embrace, demonstrating a superhuman devotion that would not let her go. And from this apparently slight divergence in these actions came the gigantic difference in the fate of these two young women. The kiss of Arpa led her back to her pagan home, while the selfless, devoted clinging of Ruth led her to marry Boaz, to be the great-grandmother of King David, and to achieve greatness among the Jewish people. That is what Shavuos was for the Jewish people standing at Mount Sinai, and should be for us this and every year. Not just to kiss, to admire, to feel affection for God, for the Torah, for mitzvos, but to embrace, to hug, to cleave. That's the story of Ruth. And that's the story of Shavuos. And may that be the story of every one of us this coming Yom Tov holiday. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.